I want to welcome everybody to the show. And the work that is contained in this show is so lovely, so gloriously lovely. Individual artists have just put their heart and soul into the work. And I hope everybody appreciates it as much as I do. We're very proud to show this work. I'm a longtime art quilter myself, and I am just so gratified to see how people have developed their unique vision. So I hope you enjoy that also. I'm also proud to introduce Mary Jo Stipe, who will give the talk, and she'll explain some of those arcane terms that I put into the publicity. So there are bios of each quilter on the wall. If you'd like to know more about her history, it's in the bio. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mary Jo.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank both Katie and Diane for inviting our group to have a show here because we love this venue. It's a perfect place to show art quilts. So thank you for the invitation. And I also want to thank the people who sort of developed this show and did a lot of the work, which would be Barbara Argatis, Janet Avery, Lisa Van Graff, and Kimberly Valenzuela. Okay. Oh, okay, there. So they all did a lot of work because when you do a show like this, it takes a lot of coordination, and we really appreciated what you did. The work you're going to see, yes, they do. This show has approximately 200 pieces, and it is the work of the Northern New Mexico Quilt Guild's Art Quilt and Surface Design Group, which is a mini group within the bigger umbrella of the Guild. We also invited members of the Contemporary Guild to show some of their work, because when you look at everything in the gallery space, you'll see that there's a lot of similarity between what's being done as contemporary quilters and as art quilters. So it's a combination of both. So the first question I wanted to answer was, what is an art quilt? And many of us are also members of an organization called the Studio Art Quilt Associates, which is an international organization that is really there to promote the art quilt as an art form that deserves to be shown in museums and galleries. And they do global shows that really, truly travel the globe. And they kind of have the perfect definition of the art quilt, and I wanted to be specific. They say an art quilt is a creative visual work that is layered and stitched, or that references this form of stitched layered structure. So that is a pretty broad definition. And the nice thing about that is it allows us as art quilters to have kind of free reign. I have to say that the most unusual art quilt I ever have seen was made out of Band-Aids. So that was pretty far out. But at any rate, you know, we use, as art quilters, we use some traditional techniques. We use very much art techniques. We might use traditional materials or unconventional materials. So we have a broad range of what we can do. And as Katie said, everybody kind of develops their own vision for their work. And I think the art quilt also kind of carries its name, its definition in its name, because it is both an artwork and a quilted structure for the most part. And art quilts are designed to be mounted on the wall or shown in big installations. Sometimes they're hung from the ceilings and grow out of the floors and things of that type. Or they're sculptural pieces that are shown as a piece of sculpture. So art quilts can be two-dimensional or they can be three-dimensional. You know, I make vessels, other people here make vessels as well as art quilts. So that's, you know, that's the basic thing. I wanted to point out too that the whole term art quilt in the big scale of art is a fairly recent phenomenon. The first time anyone used the term art quilt for an exhibition was 1986. In a pretty big show in California, in Los Angeles, that showcased the work of 16 artists who were kind of on the forefront of the art quilt movement. And at that point, it was sometime after another major kind of watershed show, which happened in New York at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and it was called Abstract Design in American Quilts. And after that, quilts sort of had a new kind of luster, and people started to collect quilts, primarily vintage quilts, antique quilts. People were collecting Amish quilts and things of that type. But it started to bring the quilt, and in that case it was bed-sized quilts, on the wall of a major American museum. And that was pretty dramatic at the time. So for this particular show, the members of our mini group were invited to pick an area of the gallery where we wanted to show our work. Each person curated their own show. It's like having a whole series of little mini one-person shows. Some people chose to showcase newer work. For some people, I see their work and I think this is a retrospective of where their art quilt work has gone. And I wanted to also point out that art quilts are mounted and shown in a number of different ways. Because we came out of a traditional quilting background in terms of the whole where we would show, primarily art quilts were first shown in quilt shows. And because of that, you had to have a sleeve on the back and a slat because they were hung on rods of some type. Now, art quilts are very often put on canvases. And you'll see a lot of that here. And one of the reasons for that is it gives you an opportunity to have your work shown in a gallery alongside paintings, collage, other traditional artwork where a slat and a rod don't quite cut it. So you'll see more of that in our work too. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the various processes and techniques that art quilters use because it's continued to change over the years. Most of us, because we are fabric lovers, still buy fabric, commercial fabric. Most of us have stashes that we figure will outlive us because we have so much fabric. But at the same time, many of us like to create our own fabric and our own designs. And we do it in a number of different ways. We tend to use pretty much traditional techniques in terms of applique, piecing, sometimes whole cloth quilts. So those come out of that tradition. But then the materials we use to make them are often something that we have hand dyed or painted ourselves or printed ourselves or designed on the iPad and sent off to someone like Spoonflower to print. So we have a lot of different options, and I wanted to go through just a few of those. First of all, applique. You'll see hand applique in our show, you'll see machine applique in our show, but you'll also see what is called fused applique. And that's kind of specific to the art quilt groups because fused applique means you're taking a piece of fabric, you're adding a fusible web to the back, really with an iron, and then you're pressing or ironing that fabric onto another surface. You know, you may cut out all these different shapes or whatever. Some can be very intricate. But the whole idea is that you can build up an image. It might be abstract, it might be very representational, but you're doing it with these small pieces of fabric, sometimes bigger pieces of fabric, that have the fusible on the back, and that way you can build up an image. And some quilters use teeny pieces to create their images, and often when that is the case, they'll put a layer of tulle on top so that you can stitch through the tulle and it will hold everything in place. So that's applique. A lot of us enjoy piecing, and sometimes the piecing will be in a block format. You'll see some of that here. Sometimes we do what is called improvisational piecing. Improvisational piecing has often been kind of related to a riff in jazz, where you start with one thing. You know, you might start with two pieces of fabric and you put them together, and then you might stitch another piece on, and then you might cut those in half, and put them together in a different way, and you're just playing. And I think that's one of the things about art quilts that I find kind of exciting, is that we like to play when we're working. You know, if an artist doesn't have a playful mindset, I don't know, I think it could get kind of boring after a while. And it's another reason why most of us have as large a design wall in our sewing studio as we can, because like any other artist, we have to step back. A painter steps back from the easel and looks at what they're doing. An art quilter puts their work on a design wall, usually covered with flannel or felt, so that the fabric sticks to it without pins. And that way we can get back and we can look at it and say, well, maybe this doesn't quite work, or maybe I need more of that color. Because we are doing what every artist does, and that is, whether it's conscious or not, we're dealing with the elements of art, the principles of design, we're dealing with composition, color, value, movement, rhythm. So everything every other artist does, we do too. We just do it with fabric instead of paint. Although, we do like to paint fabric, and that can be done in different ways too. We can paint, there's a whole group of fabric paints that have been developed specifically for use on different textiles. Some art quilters use acrylic paint exclusively. You can brush it on, you know, with a paintbrush. You can stamp it on. You can print in various different ways. For example, a lot of people like to work with found materials, print with found materials. And, you know, you might use, it's gonna sound silly, but the end of a toilet paper roll makes a great circle. And if you dip it in paint and you put it on your fabric and repeat it, you suddenly have a new art tool. So a lot of us look around for odds and ends that you see that you think you can print with. The end of a spool of thread that doesn't have any thread on it anymore. So that's one of the things we do. Many of us do silkscreen printing. So you can do multiples of something, and it's an interesting process. So screen printing is one. Another tool that a lot of us like to use is the jelly plate. In the past, artists would create their own plate using gelatin, which is great, and it has a nice hand to print from, but eventually, even though you put it in the fridge, that thing is gonna get moldy, and you can't use it anymore. But a jelly plate is a synthetic form of that, and if you treat it right, it'll last for decades. So many of us print that way. We do monoprints, where you may take a flat surface and paint on it, quite often with, excuse me, with thickened dye. So you can print with thickened dye, draw into it, have a single print. So that's another option. Excuse me. And then there are other alternative print methods. Recently, I'd say in the last 10 or 15 years maybe, cyanotypes have come back into favor. And cyanotype was developed in the mid 1800s, 1842 to be specific. And I do a lot of cyanotype, so I like that history. And I love the fact that it was a woman artist who was the first person to create a book with handmade cyanotypes. Yay for ladies, but anyway, cyanotype is a sun printing method, considered an alternative photographic method, where you put some chemicals on fabric or paper, put something on top of it, take it out, expose it in the sun, and suddenly you have this beautiful Prussian blue and white print. But you can adjust those prints too. You know, you can take a cyanotype print that's a gorgeous blue and white and decide you want it to have more of a golden cast, so you might dip it in a really strong solution of tea or some other kind of chemical, some kind of iron chemicals. So you can shift the color even in that. So even there, we're always kind of pushing the envelope and trying to develop new ways of using some of those. Another technique that many of us like is marbling on fabric, and that can be done a couple of different ways. I prefer doing it with what I think of as thickened water. Other people do marbling on fabric with shaving cream, you know. So there's always ways of going a little bit further and seeing what you can do that's going to be effective. And not, I was going to say last but not least, there is a lot being done today with digital images. There are tons of wonderful apps that you can download to a tablet or an iPad where you can draw or kind of paint directly onto that digital surface. But then there are ways to take a photograph and manipulate that photograph so that it completely changes. And what you're going to find when you go through the gallery is there are examples of all these different kinds of art quilts. And there are a lot of the artists are here, and you can always ask us questions. We like nothing better than talking about our artwork. So, so I think that's something that's important too. I guess the other thing that I wanted to point out, just because it's fun, was that the contemporary group, one person in the contemporary group was given a group of 25 Sunbonnet Sioux blocks, traditional Sunbonnet Sioux. You're laughing because my aunt made Sunbonnet Sioux, like that's all she made. So a lot of us grew up with that. At any rate, that within the contemporary group, there was a challenge to see what you could do with Sunbonnet Sioux, and it's called Whatever Happened to Sunbonnet Sioux. So you'll see some very interesting things that happened to Sunbonnet Sioux. And I'd like to point that out because I think it shows that not only are art quilters and contemporary quilters very inventive and innovative, we all have a sense of humor too. And I think that's where you really see it. So I hope you take the time to really go through, there's so many things. I didn't talk about rust dyeing. We love to dye with rust, where you take a rusty object and you use a little vinegar, a little water, you put it on the fabric, and you let it sit. I put mine in plastic bags, and then the next day you open it up and there's these wonderful rusty patterns on your fabric. Many of us dye our fabrics. We dye with not only fiber reactive dyes, but some people use natural dyes that take a different kind of mordant, dyes that are made out of flowers and leaves and things of that type. And then there's eco-dyeing. So with eco-dyeing, you're taking botanical materials, leaves, flowers, whatever, putting it onto the fabric, transferring the image onto the cloth by using steam or a heat press. So, my goodness, we could talk all afternoon about everything you can do for art prints, but I hope you'll take the time to really look at the work there. If you have any questions about some of the techniques, I'm happy to talk to you about them. I've done a presentation about the history of the art quilt, so I like to go into that too. So I hope you enjoy it and also take advantage of our little treats. Thank you so much for being here.